Greetings, fellow readers. This is the Rambling Collector, back here with another book review for all of you today. And more importantly, episode 2 of my new series, Reading Reflections. Now, before, in the last video of episode 1 with Harry Potter, I posted a vote between Game of Thrones or Percy Jackson. And as the winner of this vote, today I will be talking about the classic Percy Jackson and the Olympians series by Rick Riordan. Now, please keep this in mind. This will only be covering the original Percy Jackson and the Olympians series, since I myself have not read the Heroes of Olympus series. That one I will talk about in another future video. But for now, let's get started. So to start off with, let me give you an idea of why exactly this series spoke out to me so much. For starters, I am a huge lover of foreign mythologies, but especially Greek mythology, just because it is one of the more popularly known and most spoken about when it comes to foreign mythologies or ancient history. But not only that, but of course the first film, which, after reading the books, I regret seeing both Lightning Thief and Sea of Monsters, knowing for a fact just how badly they really messed up the books. But with all that being said, the movie itself actually brought me to check out the books in the first place. So I did say it's done its job there to show me a much better version of itself. So, with that being said, let's move on to my overall thoughts on the series. So, to start off with, I'm not going to explain the plot of this series because a lot of people know about Percy Jackson. It is a major cultural icon within both popular culture as well as the world of literature, and especially young readers' literature, so I'm not going to explain the plot. However, I'm going to just give my general thoughts as a kind of an overview of the series itself. So with that being said, the first fact here. I believe that Percy Jackson has fantastic world building, adapting the Greek gods, titans, and monsters into the modern world almost seamlessly, as well as explaining how their world stays hidden from the public via the mist, which makes all these supernatural events that happen around regular mortals look like something completely different than what our heroes and others usually deal with. And I've got to say, that explanation of just how they have stayed hidden is fascinating. And when I look back on it, this was probably my first experience with urban fantasy in a way. But also, more than that, besides the great world building, there were fantastic three-dimensional characters, each one with their own compelling stories. Now, they could have been so very simple and have all these characters focus on our main hero, that being Percy, but every character has their own unique goals that they're reaching for. For instance, Grover, the satyr, and Percy's best friend, not only helps out Percy with his quests, but he's also on his own adventure to find Pan, the wild god, as all satyrs are doing with their searcher's licenses, to look for Pan, their god, as well as protect any of the pockets of nature that are left, which I think is absolutely amazing. And then, of course, you have Percy's girlfriend, Annabeth Chase, who wants to build great architecture, like a lot of her siblings do. But at the end of the day, she accomplishes the most by being a great strategist and just being a general brains of the group, honestly. Like, there are moments where Percy or Grover will have something smart, but Annabeth is pretty much the one who keeps them all from getting killed. I'm not even going to lie to you there. But also, more than that, I believe that Percy Jackson is a great coming-of-age story with great action, which, as you notice throughout the books, it develops in detail, getting much more darker and much more grimmer as the story progresses, because it's all leading up to that final climax with their greatest foe, that being Kronos, father of Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, and the one who was essentially chopped into pieces and thrown into Tartarus, showing Kronos' escape, his manipulations. He's the great big bad at the end of the road. And all of this leading up to Kronos' eventual return, as well as the massive war once again reigniting between Olympian gods and titans, is crazy to think about. But more than that, it feels like the story just grows more and more hopeless as they go, as they see all these odds stacked against them, yet they still choose to fight regardless. And that, to me, really spoke out to me when it came to reading this series. And I won't lie to you guys, I kind of spoiled myself a little bit, because while the movies were okay, even though now I look at them and I just think, wow, they really messed up, the books, they're visual writing, in my opinion, visual storytelling. Like, you cannot tell me if you are reading this series that you cannot picture all of this happening in your head. That is one of the great strengths of Rick Riordan's story. He pulls you in. He lets your imagination go wild, imagining all these great, terrible gods and monsters, as well as just the fights that happen between them. He's that good at giving that good of a detail. So kudos to Rick Riordan for actually managing to accomplish that. But out of all the books, I can hear you all asking, out of all 5 books of the main series, which one is my favorite? I'm about to tell you. Now, if you were to ask me my favorite book out of the entire 5-book main series, I would actually have to go with Book 4, Battle of the Labyrinth. Now, a bit of a context here. When I was reading the Percy Jackson series at the time, I think Battle of the Labyrinth was actually the final book of the series I read. And I know, I probably spoiled a lot for myself by reading ahead and reading Last Olympian, as well as being completely confused. But at the same time, Battle of the Labyrinth came to be one of my personal favorites, looking back on all 5 of the books. While Last Olympian is definitely a good second place, in my opinion, Battle of the Labyrinth is at the very top, for a few reasons that I'm going to list off right here. For one, it was absolutely suspenseful due to the environment of it, as well as it acted as a good preface for the final battle in The Last Olympian, just how you see all these half-bloods and various different other half-breed creatures such as satyrs and centaurs fighting off against all these terrible monsters that have all sided with the Titans, and even minor gods as well. And not to mention, Daedalus' Labyrinth was terrifying to think about, with all the many different obstacles and enemies that they faced throughout. And it was absolutely gripping in a way of showing just what do they have to face next, what's going to come after them next in this ginormous maze that Percy and Annabeth have to deal with. And at the end of it all, they wind up finding Kronos' sarcophagus, as well as, for Percy, seeing Kronos rise again, and even, at one point, meeting the forge god Hephaestus and going to one of his forges in Mount St. Helens, which also happens to be the prison of the terrifying monster Typhon, a monster that even the Olympian gods would struggle to fight. All of that is just one part of this book. For another, it was very heavily focused on the multiple gods of the Greek pantheon, as well as their actions and consequences of some of their children, as well as the gods themselves. To give some context here, with that, we see Percy fighting another son of Poseidon, who seemingly sacrifices skulls and uses them to worship his father, which is pretty messed up, not gonna lie to you there. And having Percy starting to question just who exactly would be the favorite son of Poseidon, only to have that confirmed for him at the end of the book. But more than that, also, we see a half-blood child, Ethan Nakamura, the son of goddess Nemesis, a more minor goddess in the Greek pantheon. And we see just how all these other half-bloods are passed over just because they are the children of more minor deities in the Greek pantheon. And we see that to them, they will always be the outcasts. The minor deities and their children will always be seen as outcasts to the major gods, such as Zeus, Poseidon, as well as Hera, Athena, Hermes. Hell, Hermes' cabin is completely overfull of unclaimed demigods, and you now can see why. But also, another thing I want to talk about is Chapter 12. The entire chapter devoted between Percy and Calypso on her island of Ogygia. Now to give some context here, in the encounter in Mount St. Helens, where they see Typhon's resting place and prison, Percy at one point sees no way out and wants to give Annabeth time to escape, to go back, find Camp Half-Blood, get out of there, because it looks like a no-win situation for them. And what does he do? He summons his full power as the son of Poseidon, manages to cause a few rumblings in Mount St. Helens, which possibly will stir Typhon awake, which it does later on. And we see him unleashing his full power, whilst also becoming burned, severely injured, and just passing out after he blows himself out of Mount St. Helens and falls like a meteorite. But then he wakes up in the next chapter, and he's being taken care of by this beautiful young woman known as Calypso, someone who seems far too isolated for Percy's liking. She states that she has never really left the island. Percy doesn't think too much of it, except for the fact that she keeps mentioning just how out of it she really has been, that she has never left this island for years and years. And in my opinion, it's incredibly sad to see Percy trying to teach her about this, all of the modern day life, as well as Calypso actually teaching Percy a little bit about herself, as well as about nature, the beauty of it sometimes. For instance, when she's out investigating her garden of flowers, she helps Percy to see some of the beauty of a great flower garden, especially a unique flower that only grows in the moonlight. And Percy sees this and he realizes just how beautiful some nature can actually be. But more than that, we see him starting to struggle a little bit. And I'll get to the next topic about that, with relationships. But anyways, with Percy and Calypso, as they keep talking, Calypso finally reveals at one point that she is in fact someone who had once sympathized with the Titans, and while she did not fight the Olympian gods, she herself was still punished. And her punishment was not only just being essentially held prisoner on Ogygia, which is really just a nicer prison cell for her, but more than that, as a way to punish her, the gods sometimes send her a champion, a man who she cannot help but fall in love with, meaning that she herself has fallen in love with Percy. And I really like the talks between these two, because with Percy, he feels like he has to go back. He has to at least make sure that his friends are okay. And even more than that, when he gets a visit from Hephaestus, he sees just what his actions have caused, with Mount St. Helens essentially erupting just a little bit, as well as causing Typhon to stir, meaning Hephaestus can no longer visit that forge. But more than that, it really shows just how everyone now probably believes that Percy is dead at this point. But one thing that really stood out to me was that as Peter and Calypso are talking, Calypso actually makes an offer to Percy, that if he chooses to stay with her there on Ogygia, he would remain there, eternally youthful, as well as immortal. He wouldn't have to face the prophecy that has been thrust upon his shoulders. He would never age. He would be able to live forever in peace with her for all of eternity. And to me, this really sticks out because at this point, Percy is nearing his 16th birthday, the time when the prophecy starts to fulfill itself. And in all honesty, this presents his one final chance he has to simply turn away from it all, to leave the prophecy for somebody else to deal with, to make sure that it never comes to pass. He has the option to just walk away from all of this, walk away from being a hero, live a life in peace forever, and yet he still chooses to leave. That to me really stuck out, because even then it shows Percy's heroic nature. Despite knowing that he has a chance to just walk away from it all, he still chooses to embrace the path of a hero. And it really just breaks my heart seeing Peter and Calypso say goodbye. But let's move on to the final thing. This one I feel was very heavily focused on relationships. Not just romantic, but also family relationships, and of course friendships. We see that Percy at one point has a bit of an issue with Nico D'Angelo, a son of Hades. And we see how at first he believes that Nico is just out to kill Percy as revenge for Nico's dead sister Bianca, who had died in the previous book of Titan's Curse. But we see how over the course of the book, he still manages to essentially have Nico come around to forgive him but also spark a bit of a friendship with him. More than that, we see how at one point he tries to make friends with Ethan Nakamura, only for Ethan to wind up betraying them and siding with Kronos. And, of course, family relationships. Like I said before, this one really focuses a lot on the great Greek gods, the whole pantheon of both major and minor gods and goddesses, and especially when it comes to one of the main characters, Daedalus, a son of Athena, whom we see his actions of building up the labyrinth, his interactions with his son and his nephew. We see how Daedalus really falls from grace a lot of the times, as well as tries to avoid his punishment in the underworld. And once again, romantic relationships, we see Percy's and Annabeth's relationship actually starting to spark here. Especially when Percy tells Annabeth to run, she gives him a kiss right before she runs, which inspires Percy to unleash his full power to give her time to get away. And honestly, this one really focuses a lot on just as a good preface. But now you know my general thoughts. I'm sorry it was so long. But let's wrap this up just a little bit. And now for the fun part, random thoughts. So I'm sure a lot of you guys would ask me some particular questions, such as, who are some of your favorite characters? Obviously the main trio of Percy, Grover, and Annabeth. But god-wise, this one's kind of a no-duh, but Poseidon. But surprisingly, I also really like Hades and Ares for some reason. I have no idea why. Like, the main trio is kind of a no-duh situation, as well as, of course, Poseidon is another no-duh. But with Hades and Ares, I'm going to start with Hades first, okay? With Hades, I feel like he's just this one dude who just chills out in the underworld, barely gets involved in the Greek gods' mischievous ways or their politics or whatever. But at the same time, he feels like the underdog, just the guy who's really not that appreciated or welcome at feasts or celebrations or anything like that. But at the same time, he is one of the most important, seeing as he is the ruler of the dead. Not to mention the arguments he has between his wife Persephone and his mother-in-law Demeter is honestly just some of the funniest things ever. Like, you can just feel the family drama going on just between those three. And I gotta say, it was hilarious in my opinion. But other than that, Hades once again has to run the entire underworld, and you can see how he is just completely stressed out about it. Just how many people are dying in there, how it's starting to get overcrowded, and everything just kind of sucks in his kingdom, because, you know, ruler of the dead, and all that, but he tries to make the best of it that he can. But I really like how he finally gets some appreciation in the 5th book when he just rises up on a freaking chariot and just starts wrecking monsters left and right, summoning armies of the dead to fight with him. I thought that was awesome, especially the part where he just goes to quote, "Now come and face me, for today the house of Hades shall be known as the heroes of Olympus," end quote. And I gotta say, that was absolutely an awesome moment, having Nico and his dad just run up like the hero's entrance in the final fight of the last Olympian. I absolutely loved that, especially with how Hades gets some appreciation afterwards, like even having his son Nico build a Hades cabin in Camp Half-Blood. I thought that was kind of awesome. Now as for Ares, with him, it's a little bit more complex. At least I think so. Yes, we see he is a terrible father to his kids. I won't even lie to you there. The whole thing with Book 2 with Clarice being threatened by her dad, I do not vibe with that. But as for the rest, like in Book 1, like I don't know why, but to me he's both a jerk, but he's also fun because he's a jerk. Like he's this overconfident, super cocky person who's just like, I've been fighting for 1,000 years. What have you got, punk? Comes in with like a leather jacket duster, baseball bat, sunglasses hiding his flaming eyes. I don't know. Just something about that screams that he's a jerk, but he's a fun kind of jerk. At least that's just my perspective. Not to mention, I won't lie to you guys. Every time I have read his quotes or any of his dialogue in the books, for some reason I always got the vibe of Steve Bloom, especially in this one. Let me quote here from Book 1 here. You have made an enemy, godling. You have sealed your fate. Every time you raise your blade in battle, every time you hope for success, you will feel my curse. Beware, Perseus Jackson. Beware. End quote. And yeah, other than that, I love the action. Like, there's a lot of good things in here. And I feel like, again, this one was just the start of me for urban fantasy. But another crazy thought, I actually really liked, who was it now? Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. I feel like having her just like managing hearth and home, that was pretty sweet. And also Luke's backstory was just absolute tragedy, with him both being the son of Hermes, the messenger god, but also having to deal with a mother who tried to become the next oracle and wound up just driving her insane and having her build tons of lunches and cookies at home for a son who would never appear again. And that is honestly just incredibly sad. I'm not gonna lie to you there. Oh boy. But another thing. I feel like already it was kind of biased because Poseidon is definitely one of my favorites of the Greek pantheon. Just because, I mean, come on. The sea is totally awesome. Who here agrees with me there? But other than that, I feel like this is good for random thoughts right here. But with that being said, I have one question for all of you. Which one would you want to hear about next? Would you want to hear about Christopher Paolini's Inheritance Cycle, or George R. R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire in the next episode of Reading Reflections? I will leave that up to you guys to decide. And I will not lie to you. This was actually super fun to finally talk about another favorite urban fantasy series of mine, and I love the interaction from all of you who stayed to the end of this video. And if anything, you guys, just thank you once again for listening to this crazy man's ramblings, and thank you for joining me on another episode of Reading Reflections. I hope you'll be able to stick around for the next episode, and if you want to check out my first episode, feel free to click the playlist for Reading Reflections here, or if you want to hear about some of the other books I've covered, feel free to click the link to that playlist as well. More than anything, guys, once again, thank you so much for listening to this crazy man's ramblings. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like, leave a comment down below on your thoughts of it, and feel free to subscribe if you're interested for more. Once again, you guys, thank you so much for listening. This is Rambling Collector, signing off. Keep reading, my friends.